You have this whole class of batteries, these LFP batteries, that appear safer but aren't really safer because they release much more toxic gases. But the one kind of battery that the company here says they're using is not toxic, but we're not going to release the data. So I don't know if they even have any choice. They may not be allowed to. But the bottom line is, yeah, LFP batteries can go into thermal runaway. And when they do, whoa, you don't want to be anywhere close by.
I think we totally undervalue our agricultural sector in this province. And, there's this whole sort of urban-rural divide. We see that in the electoral process, We need to have our voices heard, too. I mean, we live in this country as well. We provide food for you, and we keep your cities fed, So, why don't you start listening to us for a change, too?
Alex Alaba for Rebel News, and many of you are probably questioning the renewable energy projects being built in Canada. The renewable energy sector is not without its problems. Take wind turbine blades, for example, which cannot be recycled and are piling up in landfills. Solar panels with an average lifespan of about 30 years have inefficient and rarely deployed recycling technologies. This issue is growing, and now we are seeing a new development: battery energy storage systems, BESS, being constructed at multiple sites across Canada. While these systems hold lots of potential, they also carry significant risk: fire hazards, dangers to livestock like cows, cybersecurity vulnerabilities, water and soil contamination, and more. Today, we are focusing on a specific project planned to be built on an agricultural farm in North Glengarry. The company has leased part of the land to build a giant battery energy storage system, but the local community is pushing back. Residents say their concerns have been ignored, not only during council meetings, but also when they tried to reach out directly to the project's developers.
It's about the best. I know you don't want to hear it, but you're going to hear it anyway, please. I propose something to all this council, to the fire chief, to the CEO, to Jacob, the building bylaw guy. We'll even supply the transportation, Jamie. We would like you to go to Mr. and Mrs. Automat's, and we would like you to walk through their barn to the northwest side and see exactly how close this project is to them, and to see why this couple and their neighbors are not sleeping at night because they're terrified.
We could argue about it all day, but I'm very sorry. There really is just not anything that we can do, and the building permit will be issued tomorrow.
The project is managed by Compass Renewable Energy Consulting, Inc., which is actively involved in BESS projects across Ontario. While Compass handles project development, financing, and regulatory compliance, the specific suppliers for batteries, grid integration, hardware, and software have not been publicly disclosed. I met with some members of the North Glengarry community. Let's hear their legitimate concerns.
There are no more questions on the BESS.
It's not a question, it's a statement.
There are no statements.
Have proven to be
there are no statements. Sorry.
Severely
We are
risking a fire, and they're fires that people.
You have misinformation. You're passing on misinformation.
No, it's a generally accepted.
No, it's not a generally accepted
running
document.
Around.
No. Battery BESS project, battery energy storage system. I believe it's a 17 megawatt project. They've actually rezoned prime agricultural land using a bylaw amendment 257, agricultural exception, on-farm diversified. It's a bit of a, honestly, that's a bit of a stretch there, because this is really an industrial, at least electrical utility use. So I really think, and of course, if it was rezoned that way or looked at in that perspective, it would require much more due diligence on the part of the municipality. We would probably have environmental impact statements. They came to the council with a delegation in September 2023, and October 18th, 2023, they had what can only be considered a failed public consultation because virtually no residents of North Glengarry were actually there. Interesting enough, the proponent was there, the landowner was there, I believe. Some members of council were there. In fact, there was a councillor from the neighboring municipality there as well, but somehow nobody in the community was there. You do want to have community support, and clearly they don't have community support in this context. And you know, they are our elected representatives, right? Mm-hmm. They're there to represent us, and we're telling them we don't want this project here. You know, there's too many issues. It's gone too quickly. We haven't been properly consulted. So there's a number of things there that really should, in all contexts, it should be revisited.
We've gotten the information that we believe is correct. It's been tested, and we feel confident that it is going to go and nothing will happen.
I believe in the lease agreement, proponent has outlined that the landowners intend to actually continue farming practices on that property. So that'll prove to be challenging, I think, at some point. We touched on it a little bit earlier about EMF. We're actually looking into studies with that, and there are some clear indications that it does affect cattle and livestock. So I'm not confident in a sense that they can just go ahead and have business as usual.
In a situation like that, there will be 30 seconds and then the smoke will be over here. And I asked the best president, Vice President, you would come and help me get 400 animals out of the barn, and they have no answer for that. And where we want to bring them to milk them again in 8 hours because they have to be milked again. Just a little smoke, like the cows are so sensible. Like they smell every little, this gets spooky and they go crazy. And my concern is even on a regular space, like when they just run, there could be an effect to the cows because we had straight voltage before and that takes months to fix. We hosted cows from 2 different barn fires, like regular barn fires, and those cows are really crazy and they're losing calves and they get hard to rebreed. And
some of these farmers have lived through that experience in the past just with a regular barn fire. Now, can you imagine when you have a highly toxic emission fire that's going to spread toxic chemicals and pollutants and it basically damage the neighboring property, the groundwater. We have an aquifer, it's about a kilometer away. So if that gets into the water table, most people are on well system, you know, out here in the country. So if that, you know, it damages or pollutes the water table, you know, we're all stuck. You know, we're going to be on bottled water for how long? You know, how long? Again, there's no plan, you know, that's in place to actually deal with this. You know, there's a lot of platitudes that are being given to us, but there's no actual concrete plan. And I think that's really one of the crux of the issue. You know, what do you do in an emergency situation, right?
When asked about the firefighters, which is voluntary firefighters over here, at first they had said, oh yeah, we have trained them. However, I found out that the voluntary firefighters have not been trained, so they reverted their answer to say, oh, well, we are going to train them on site.
See, the batteries, they need to be properly cooled, right? So you need a 24/7 HVAC system. And I believe this one, talking to the proponent the other night, they did mention the fact, Compass, they're actually going to have to draw power from the grid to just keep these HVAC systems going. So I think the issue is what happens if we do have a grid failure? The HVAC systems will eventually shut off, you know, sooner than later. I think they might have indicated that they would run off the batteries, but the battery storage is only for 4 hours, right? If the batteries do overheat, the cells can combust, and then we end up with a what they call a thermal runaway situation, where one cell, it's kind of like a domino effect. You know, if you're playing the game of dominoes, you knock one over and, you know, it goes right down the row. Well, that's similar with the batteries. You know, if there's one that catches fire, heaven forbid, it's going to be a domino effect. And the temperatures are not normal temperatures for a regular house fire. It can be upwards of 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Trying to extinguish it with water will actually promote the fire. And right now, there are no regulations in all of Canada that actually deal with this, how to actually deal with it. So at the moment, they're just sort of standing back and watching it burn itself out.
Yeah, well, there's lots of different types, but the kind that they're going to use for this particular location is called an LFP battery. L stands for lithium, F is ferrous, which means iron, and P is for phosphate. So it's LFP batteries. Now, back in the October 2023 public presentation, presentation, to which almost nobody here, in fact, nobody here was at because they didn't know about it, they gave the impression that LFP batteries are really safe. Okay, now this is a very deceiving statement actually, because there's actually been research done around the world, and what they find is that an LFP battery does not ignite as easily. It doesn't go into thermal runaway until the temperature is about 100 degrees higher than for NCA and other batteries. So that gives you the impression that the LFP batteries are safe. But they've done research in the St. Andrews University, University of London, other places, which show that once they ignite, they're much more toxic. Okay, they release things like hydrogen fluoride and stuff like that. So during the meeting on, let's see, it was the 30th of April, just last Wednesday, they were saying how safe their batteries were. And so I went, somebody gave me the mic because I said, no, not true. And I explained to them, I said, look, LFP batteries appear to be safer because they need 100 degrees higher temperature before they go into thermal runaway. But when they do go into runaway, they're much more toxic, okay? They actually release a lot more. Now, the answer they gave me was quite interesting. They said, yes, you're right, but our particular type of LFP battery is not releasing toxic substances according to the tests that were done. So somebody in the audience said, will you share the data on your website? Which is a good idea, because if all the other LFP batteries in the world are dangerous because they put out toxic gases and also have a lot more hydrogen, twice as much hydrogen as an NCA, and hydrogen, of course, is an explosive. I mean, they can easily explode. Well, the company said, well, we had those tests done, but the results are proprietary. We won't share it. So, you know, people in the audience sort of groaned because you have this whole class of batteries, these LFP batteries, that appear safer, but aren't really safer because they release much more toxic gases. But the one kind of battery that the company here says they're using is not toxic, but we're not going to release the data. So I don't know if they even have any choice. They may not be allowed to. But the bottom line is, yeah, LFP batteries can go into thermal runaway. And when they do, whoa, you don't want to be anywhere close by.
The batteries, as you have learned, primarily come from China. And they also come with sensors. The sensors are required in case of fire and electricity breakdown, whatever reason. The problem with these sensors are there's a back door. And this project itself, we were told the power would go to Ottawa. Ottawa already has 2 battery energy storage facilities approved. If the Chinese should, and they could, shut it down. And my question to IESO and Minister Lecce, Minister of Energy, is Canada's artificial intelligence and cybersecurity equal to or better than China's to prevent such a happening?
Just think of it this way. If you're the property owner and you've got this massive fire going on in your property, obviously you're going to be responsible for it because the proponent, they've actually leased this property, right? They don't actually own it. So in the end, it's going to come down to the property owner. I don't know what kind of gold-plated insurance or platitudes they've been given, but I think in the end, you know, they're opening themselves up for liability at some point within the community at large. So I'm not convinced that there's some sort of gold-plated, because the government of Ontario might be encouraging this through the Independent Electricity Systems Operator. That doesn't fly well in the middle of a fire, I'm afraid. You know,
For the protection for the farmland, when I asked them about the insurance, I asked them who they were insured with. I asked whose name was on the insurance policy. They couldn't answer, other than maybe the name of a insurer. I don't know how big their insurance is, what their limits of liability, what their limits is in everything.
We were looking at possible doing an application with the Ontario Land Tribunal. So one of the issues there is Mr. Ford's government in 2018 changed the legislation and severely restricted the ability for third parties, i.e. the community at large, to actually have any input into the whole process. And and raise their concerns and actually have an appeal if it's going against the wishes of the community in that sense. And these are not just simple wishes. These are facts that we could lose our livelihood here if things go wrong, and we're not convinced at this stage that they have any procedure or policies in place. And the fact that they're leasing the property, they can walk away whenever they feel like it, and who's left to actually clean up the mess? And what's going to be the property values? We talk a bit about insurance, but what's people's property value going to be? How are they going to sell? How are they going to recoup anything? They're going to be out of production for a considerable amount of time. There appears to be no real coverage insurance-wise. There might be first-party coverage to the proponent. I'm not even sure the landowner's covered, to be frank, but certainly third-party, the community at large, the farmers that actually have their livelihood invested in this, they're not covered at all. Mm-hmm. And then, in fact, some of them have asked their own insurance policy, am I covered in case of this event? And they aren't covered at all. They've realize that.
Because this insurance covers contamination, pollution, only if liability claims are triggered by third party. Meaning these farmers, landowners, residents, they're going to have to hire a lawyer, and the lawyer will have to try and defend and go back to the company to sue them. On top of that, they'd have to hire engineers, consultants, and make a study to make sure it's contaminated. So who's going to pay for all that cost?
I think we totally undervalue our agricultural sector in this province. And, there's this whole sort of urban-rural divide. We see that in the electoral process. We need to have our voices heard, too. I mean, we live in this country as well. We provide food for you, and we keep your cities fed, So, why don't you start listening to us for a change, too?
If you have any tip about those best projects, you can send us a tip at tips@ribbonnews.com. Meanwhile, go and sign our petition at nogreenreset.com. Make your voice heard that we don't want to remove the oil and gas to be replaced by a green energy that is not that green. So go and sign it now.